Start speaking, and the world listen.
Start speaking, the world will start listening. The world isn't silent, it just doesn't hear you. Not because you speak foolishly. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've been speaking quieter than you feel for too long. Every time you stayed silent, someone else spoke in your place. They took the attention, they took the opportunities, they took your spot. This book starts with a simple step. You will start speaking, and the world will be forced to listen. Introduction: Why they don't hear you. The truth rarely spoken aloud. You think they're not listening because what you say isn't interesting enough, isn't smart enough, isn't valuable enough, but that's not it. They're not listening because you're not speaking with the weight of someone who expects to be heard. And people can feel that. They feel when you're asking for permission to speak, when you're apologizing for taking up space, when you're hoping they'll tolerate your voice. And when they feel that, they tune out. Not consciously, not maliciously, they just stop paying attention. Because you've signaled that what you're saying isn't important, and if you don't think it's important, why should they? But here's the truth: you do have something to say, something valuable, something necessary, something the world needs to hear. You've just been hiding it behind softness, behind hesitation, behind the fear of being seen, and that fear has cost you more than you realize. It's cost you opportunities, respect, influence, connection. Because when you don't speak, the world doesn't wait for you. It moves on to the person who did speak, even if what they said was less valuable than what you were holding back. So this book isn't about becoming louder, it's about becoming clear. Clear in what you say, clear in how you say it. Clear in the expectation that when you speak, people will listen, because they will. Not because you demand it, but because you stopped apologizing for your existence. And that changes everything. Chapter 1: The Silence That Costs You. Silence was never safe, it was just convenient for others. You think staying quiet keeps you safe, keeps you from being judged, from being criticized, from being wrong, but silence doesn't protect you. It erases you. 1. How you lose influence by staying quiet. Influence isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but it is about being heard. And when you stay quiet, you're not just withholding your opinion. You're withholding your presence. Think about it. The person who speaks is the person who gets remembered. The person who contributes is the person who gets valued. The person who shares ideas is the person who gets opportunities. And you, by staying quiet, or handing all of that to someone else. Not because they're more qualified, not because they have better ideas, but because they spoke and you didn't, and over time that compounds. People start assuming you don't have opinions, you don't have ideas, you don't have value to add, not because it's true, but because you've been so consistently silent that they've stopped looking to you. And that's how you lose influence, not in one moment, but in 1,000 moments of choosing silence when you could have spoken. 1. The cost of unsaid words. Every word you don't say has a cost. The idea you don't share, someone else shares a worse version and gets credit. The boundary you don't set, someone crosses again and again until you resent them. The truth you don't speak builds up inside you until it becomes bitterness. The compliment you don't give, a connection that never forms. The question you don't ask, an opportunity that passes. Unsaid words don't just disappear. They accumulate. They turn into regret. I should have said something. I should have spoken up. I should have asked for what I wanted. And that regret, that's the real cost. Not the risk of speaking, but the certainty of silence, because when you speak, you might be rejected. But when you don't speak, you reject yourself. And that's the cost no one talks about. 1. 3. Why the world doesn't guess your value. The world doesn't read minds. It doesn't see your potential unless you show it. It doesn't recognize your value unless you demonstrate it. You think if you're good enough, people will just know. They'll notice your work. They'll see your talent. They'll appreciate your worth. But they won't, not because they're blind, but because they're busy. Busy with their own lives, their own problems, their own goals. And if you're not making yourself visible through your voice, you're invisible. No matter how talented you are, no matter how valuable you could be. Because value that's not communicated might as well not exist. So stop waiting for the world to guess. Stop waiting for people to notice. Start speaking. Show them your value, not by boasting, but by contributing, by sharing. By being present in conversations that matter, because the world will only value you as much as you show up. And showing up requires your voice. Chapter 2. The fear of being heard, the fear of being seen. You're not afraid to speak, you're afraid to be seen. The fear of speaking isn't really about words. It's about visibility, because when you speak, people see you. And that feels dangerous. 2. 1. What's really behind the fear of using your voice? You think you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, of sounding stupid, of being judged. But that's not the real fear. The real fear is this: if you speak and show who you really are, what if they don't like what they see? What if you're not good enough? What if you're rejected, not for what you said, but for who you are? That's the fear of being seen fully, authentically, and not being accepted. So you stay quiet. Not because you don't have anything to say, but because speaking means revealing yourself. And revealing yourself means taking the risk that you might be rejected. But here's what you're missing by staying silent. To avoid rejection, you're rejecting yourself. You're deciding that the real you isn't worth risking being seen. And that's the real tragedy. Not that someone might reject you when you speak, but that you're rejecting yourself by staying silent. 2. The danger of being yourself. Being yourself feels dangerous because it is, not physically, but emotionally. Because when you show up authentically, you're vulnerable. You're not hiding behind a persona. You're not performing a version of yourself that you think people will accept. You're just you, and that's terrifying. Because if they reject the real you, you can't say, well, they didn't really know me. They did, and they still said no, so you stay hidden. You present a safer version, a more agreeable version. A version you think they'll accept, but that version isn't you. And living as that version is exhausting because you're constantly monitoring what you say, how you act, what you reveal, making sure you don't slip up and show the real you. But here's the truth: the people worth knowing don't want the safe version. They want the real one, and the people who only accept the safe version aren't your people. So yes, being yourself is risky, but pretending not to be is riskier. Because you might gain acceptance, but you'll lose yourself in the process. 2. Why attention feels scary. Attention feels like a spotlight, bright, exposing, uncomfortable. When people look at you, you feel exposed. Like they can see all your flaws, all your insecurities, all the ways you don't measure up. So you avoid attention, you stay in the background, you deflect compliments. You minimize your achievements because attention feels dangerous. But here's what's actually happening: attention isn't dangerous. Your fear of being inadequate is what's dangerous. Because that fear keeps you from showing what you're capable of. It keeps you from being recognized for your work. It keeps you from opportunities that require visibility. So you stay small. Not because you want to, but because staying small feels safer than being seen. But it's not. Because staying small guarantees you'll never get what you want. But being seen at least gives you a chance, so start getting comfortable with attention. Not by seeking it desperately, but by accepting it when it comes. By not deflecting when someone notices your work. By not minimizing when someone acknowledges your contribution. By simply saying thank you and letting the attention be there, without running from it. Chapter 3: Why Confident People Don't Look Confident. Confidence isn't cloudness, it's clarity. You think confident people are the loudest in the room, the most assertive, the most dominant, but that's not confidence. That's overcompensation. Real confidence is quiet. 1 Myths about confident speech. Myth 1. Confident people never hesitate. False. Confident people pause. They think before they speak. They don't rush to fill every silence. Myth 2. Confident people always sound certain. False. Confident people say I don't know when they don't. They don't pretend to have all the answers. Myth 3. Confident people never get nervous. False. Confident people feel nervous and speak anyway. They don't wait for the nervousness to disappear. Myth 4. Confident people talk a lot. False. Confident people talk when they have something to say. And they're comfortable with silence when they don't. See the pattern? Confidence isn't about performing certainty. It's about being comfortable with who you are and what you know even when you don't have all the answers. 2 Calm tone is strength. A calm tone doesn't mean weak, it means controlled. When you speak calmly, even about something important, people listen more carefully. Because they sense you're not trying to convince them through volume. You're just stating what is, and that's powerful. Because cloudness can be ignored, but calm certainty demands attention. Think about the people who command respect. They're not the loudest. They're the ones who speak with a steady calm that says, I don't need to raise my voice because I know you're going to listen. And they're right, people do listen. Because that calm, that steadiness communicates authority. Not the kind that's imposed, the kind that's earned. So if you want to be heard, don't speak louder. Speak calmer, slower, steadier. With the tone of someone who knows their words matter, and they will. 3 Presence that's felt. Presence isn't about being the center of attention. It's about being fully there. When you're present, people feel it, not because you're loud. Not because you're dominating, but because you're grounded. Engaged, listening, and when you do speak, it lands. Because you've been present the whole time, so people trust that what you say matters. Because you haven't been filling every silence with noise. You've been choosing your moments, and when you speak, it means something. That's presence, not dominance, not volume, just being there. Fully, and letting your words carry weight because of that presence. Chapter 4: Your voice is your tool of influence. People don't believe words, they believe the sound. You think it's what you say that matters, and it is. But how you say it matters more, because people don't just hear words. They feel the energy behind them. 1 How voice conveys status. Your voice tells people who you think you are. If you speak with a rising inflection at the end of sentences, like you're asking a question, even when you're making a statement, people cheer uncertainty. And uncertainty lowers your status. If you speak quickly, rushing through your words, people cheer anxiety, and anxiety lowers your status. If you speak quietly, forcing people to lean in, people cheer insecurity, and insecurity lowers your status. But if you speak with a downward inflection at the end of statements, people cheer certainty. If you speak at a measured pace with pauses, people cheer control. If you speak at a volume that's comfortable to cheer, people cheer confidence. And confidence raises your status. Your voice is a signal of how you see yourself. And people will treat you according to that signal. So if you want to be treated with respect, speak like someone who respects themselves. 4. 2 pauses, pace, intonation. The power of speech isn't just in the words, it's in the spaces between them. Pause is a pause before you speak shows you're thinking. Not scrambling for words, a pause in the middle of a sentence creates emphasis. It makes people lean in. A pause after you speak gives your words space to land, instead of rushing to fill the silence. Pace, speaking slowly, shows control. It says I'm not in a hurry because I know you're listening. Speaking too fast shows anxiety. It says I need to get this out before you stop paying attention. So slow down, not monotonously, but intentionally. Give each word the space it needs. Intonation is the melody of your voice. Going up at the end of a sentence sounds like a question. Even when it's not, going down at the end sounds like a statement. Definitive, clear, so pay attention to your intonation. Are you making statements that sound like questions? If so, you're undermining your own authority. 4. 3. Why people start listening without pressure. When you speak with calm certainty, with pauses that show control, with a tone that conveys respect for yourself, people listen. Not because you forced them, not because you demanded attention, but because your voice communicated what I'm saying matters. And when people feel that, they listen automatically. Because humans are wired to pay attention to people who seem to know what they're talking about. And that certainty, that calm signals I know, so they listen, not out of the obligation, but out of curiosity and respect. That's the power of voice, not in what you say, but in how you sound when you say it. Chapter 5. What to say when it feels like there's nothing to say. The silence in your head isn't emptiness, it's restraint. You know that moment when someone asks you a question, and your mind goes completely blank? It's not because you have nothing to say, it's because you've spent so long holding back. You've forgotten how to let words flow. The silence in your head, that's not emptiness, that's years of self-editing. Years of waiting for the perfect words that never come. But here's what nobody tells you: the perfect words don't exist. They never did. What exists is honesty, real words, simple words, words that come from what you actually think, not what you think people want to hear. In this chapter, you'll learn how to find words in the moment, not scripted words, not polished words, just true ones. Because when you stop chasing perfection and start speaking truth, something shifts. People lean in, they listen, they feel it. You don't need to sound impressive, you need to sound like yourself. And that's exactly what we're about to unlock. 5. 1. The myth of the perfect response. You've been there. Someone asks you a question, all eyes turn to you, and your mind goes blank, not because you're stupid, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've trained yourself to wait for the perfect answer. The truth, perfect answers don't exist. They never did. What exists is honest answers, real answers, answers that come from what you actually think, not from what you imagine people want to hear. 5. 2. Why simple words win. Here's what no one tells you about powerful communication: the most influential people don't use complicated words. They use clear ones. I don't know. I disagree. That doesn't feel right to me. Give me a moment to think. These aren't weak phrases. They're honest ones. And honesty always sounds stronger than pretense. When you stop trying to impress and start trying to connect, everything changes. People don't remember fancy vocabulary. They remember the person who made them feel understood. 5. 3. Finding words in the moment. So what do you do when your mind goes blank? You give yourself permission to be human. Pause, breathe, and say what's true right now. I'm thinking about this. That's an interesting question. Let me answer it honestly. I'm not sure yet, but here's what I'm feeling. You don't need a script. You need presence. The words will come when you stop forcing them, when you stop performing and start showing up. 5. For the power of I don't know. Most people are terrified of these 3 words because they think it makes them look incompetent. Wrong. I don't know makes you look real. It says I'm not pretending. I'm not hiding. I'm confident enough to admit what I don't have figured out. And that confidence, it's magnetic. 5. Honest over perfect. Every single time, choose honest over perfect, because perfection is a performance, and performances exhaust everyone watching. But honesty lands, it resonates, it makes people lean in. When you speak from what's real, you never have to worry about what to say. You just say what's true, and truth always has weight. Chapter 6. Stop apologizing for existing. An apology is supposed to repair harm, not erase your presence. Sorry, can I just say something? Sorry to bother you, but I might be wrong, but this is probably stupid. But how many times a day do you apologize for existing? You're not doing it because you've done something wrong. You're doing it because somehow you learned that taking up space requires an apology. It doesn't. Every time you say sorry before stating your opinion, you're not being polite. You're preemptively erasing yourself. You're telling people don't take this seriously. I don't even take it seriously. And guess what? They won't. In this chapter, you'll learn how to stop apologizing for your existence, how to state your thoughts without hedging, how to say I think this without defending it before anyone attacks. Because here's the truth, apologies steal respect, not from others, from you. And the moment you stop giving your power away with every sorry, that's the moment people start treating you differently. Not because you became aggressive, but because you became clear. Let's reclaim your space. 6. 1. The language of self-erasure. Sorry, can I just say something? Sorry to bother you, but I might be wrong. But this is probably stupid, but listen to yourself. How many times a day do you apologize for taking up space? You're not doing it because you've done something wrong. You're doing it because somewhere along the way, you learned that your existence is an inconvenience. It's not. 6. 2. Apologies that steal respect. Every unnecessary apology chips away at how people see you, and more importantly, how you see yourself. When you say sorry before stating your opinion, you're not being polite. You're preemptively discrediting yourself. You're saying don't take this seriously. I don't even take it seriously. And guess what? They won't. 6. 3. What to say instead. Replace apologies with clarity. Instead of sorry, can I say something? Say I have a thought on this. Instead of sorry to bother you, say do you have a moment? Instead of I might be wrong, but say here's what I think. You're not being rude, you're being direct, and directness is respect, both for yourself and for others. 6. For the calm I think so. You don't need to shout your opinions. You don't need to defend them before anyone attacks. You just need to state them. Calmly, clearly. Without apology. I think we should go in a different direction. I see it differently. That doesn't work for me. No hedge, no softening, no apology. Just I think this, and I'm not ashamed of thinking it. That's power. 6. 5. Reclaiming your space. Every time you speak without apologizing, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You stop asking permission to exist. You stop treating your presence as a burden. And slowly, the world starts to respond differently, because when you stop apologizing, people stop expecting you to. When you take up space confidently, they make room. Chapter 7. When they interrupt and ignore. You're not interrupted because you're weak. You're interrupted because you yield. It feels personal, doesn't it? Someone cuts you off mid-sentence, and it's like they're saying what you're saying doesn't matter. But here's the truth: most people miss: you're not interrupted because you're weak. You're interrupted because every time it happens, you stop talking. You yield. And in that moment, you teach them interrupting you works. It's not about dominance, it's about patterns. If you back down every time, they learn to interrupt every time, not because they're cruel, but because it's effective. So what do? You don't raise your voice, you don't fight, you don't make a scene. You just continue, calmly, steadily, as if they didn't speak. In this chapter, you'll learn how to hold your ground without conflict, how to reclaim attention without drama, how to speak with pauses that make interruption impossible. Because the truth is, when you stop yielding, they stop interrupting. Not because people change, but because you do. Let's take back your voice. 7. 1. The truth about being interrupted. Let's be honest, it feels personal. Someone cuts you off mid-sentence, and it's like they're saying what you're saying doesn't matter. But here's the truth: most people interrupt out of habit, not malice. They're not evaluating your worth, they're just used to filling silence. Used to dominating space, used to no one stopping them. So the question isn't why do they interrupt me? The question is, why do I let them? 7. 2. The mistake of backing down. When someone interrupts, your instinct is to retreat. To stop talking, to let them have the floor. And in that moment, you teach them interrupting you works. It's not about dominance, it's about patterns. If you yield every time, they learn to interrupt every time. Not because they're cruel, but because it's effective. 7. 3. How to hold your ground without conflict. You don't need to raise your voice, you don't need to fight, you just need to continue. When someone interrupts, don't stop mid-sentence. Finish your thought. Calmly, steadily, as if they didn't speak, or pause, make eye contact, and say, "I wasn't finished." Not aggressive, not apologetic, just factual. 7. 4. The power of the pause. Here's something most people don't realize: interruptions thrive in rush speech. When you speak quickly, nervously, as if you're afraid of losing the floor, you invite interruption. But when you speak with pauses, when you let silence sit between your sentences, people wait, they listen, they can't interrupt without it being obvious. Pauses protect your space. 7. 5. Reclaiming attention without drama. You don't need a big confrontation. You don't need to call anyone out. You just need to stay present. If someone talks over you, wait for them to finish, then continue where you left off. As I was saying, calm, unbothered, clear. You're not asking for permission to speak, you're simply speaking. And when you do that consistently, the interruptions stop, not because people change, but because you do. Chapter 8. The first moment the world starts listening. It doesn't happen all at once, but it always happens. You won't see it coming. One day you'll be in the middle of a conversation. You'll say something simple, maybe even ordinary, but this time, people will listen. Not because you said something brilliant, but because something inside you changed. Your voice is steadier, your presence is calmer, you're not asking for space anymore, you're just occupying it. Before the world listens, something in you has to break: the belief that you need permission, the belief that you're too much or not enough, the belief that your voice doesn't matter. It doesn't shatter dramatically, it cracks quietly. And one day you realize you're speaking without fear, not because the fear is gone, but because you're speaking anyway. In this chapter, you'll understand the inner shift that changes everything. The moment when you stop performing and start being. The moment when your words stop asking for validation and start carrying weight. This is the moment the world starts listening, not because you demanded it, but because you finally believed you deserved it. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. This is where everything changes. 8. 1. The shift you don't see coming. You won't notice it at first. You'll be in the middle of a conversation, and you'll say something. Something simple, maybe even ordinary, But this time, people will listen. Not because you said something profound, but because something in you changed. Your voice is steadier, your presence is calmer, you're not asking for space anymore. You're just occupying it. 8. To the inner break. Before the world listens, something inside you breaks. The belief that you need permission, the belief that you're too much or not enough, the belief that your voice doesn't matter. It doesn't shatter dramatically, it cracks quietly. And one day you realize you're speaking without fear. Not because the fear is gone, but because you're speaking anyway. 8. Through the new feeling. It feels like space. Like you're no longer compressed into a smaller version of yourself. Like your words have room to breathe. You're not performing. You're not calculating. You're not second-guessing every sentence. You're just there. Fully, unapologetically, and people feel it. 8. For how speech changes reality. Here's the thing about using your voice: it doesn't just change how people see you. It changes how you see yourself. Every time you speak up, you prove something to yourself. Every time you hold your ground, you get stronger. Not louder, stronger, and strength has a gravity to it. It pulls people in. It makes them pay attention. You don't demand respect. You embody it. 8. 5. This is just the beginning. The first time someone truly listens to you, it feels like magic. But it's not magic. It's the natural result of showing up, of speaking, of refusing to shrink. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. You'll keep speaking. Keep showing up, keep taking up space. Not because you're chasing validation, but because you finally understand your voice was always worth hearing. You just had to believe it first. Conclusion. You've already started. You don't have to shout. You just have to sound like yourself. And when you do, the world will answer. The book you just read isn't about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming the small, quiet, apologetic version of yourself that you were taught to be. You were never meant to be silent. You were never meant to shrink. You were meant to speak. To take up space, to let the world hear what you have to say. And now, you've started. Maybe you haven't said everything yet. Maybe you're still scared. Maybe your voice still shakes. That's okay. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is speaking through the fear. And every time you do, you get a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more yourself. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The beginning of a life where you no longer wait for permission. Where you no longer apologize for existing. Where you speak and the world listens. Not because you demand it, but because you deserve it. You always did. Now go speak. The world is waiting.